All right, so let's start a little bit with the context and basically the whys behind all of this. I think the first thing to understand is, as we got into this work, really what was our focus? And the focus here was in removing this gap between sustainability and business. What we're really trying to do with this effort, of course, is to kind of monetize the benefits of some of these initiatives we were doing. But the bigger picture behind this was, how do we translate these activities that, normally are considered sustainability projects into business projects? How do we integrate this sort of thinking into dealing with the business challenges we have every day? So, besides doing the mechanical work of monetizing this, as Guillermo said, this was as much about changing mindsets as it was the technical work that goes behind this. So, when we started off, that was a real important thing for us to keep in mind, and really where that led us is to, okay, if we're going to try to change those mindsets, where do we start? And I think the key thing that we thought about was, okay, let's really focus on decision making, and in particular decisions about where to invest or where to focus efforts so that the business will be better and will have a positive impact on the environment and the societal issues that are associated with the things that we're going to look at. So really trying to influence and change and improve decision making, we thought was kind of an important place for what we needed, where we needed to go. I think, the next part of this was, taking these concepts and saying, okay, exactly how are we going to do this? So we want to improve decision making, but what sort of kind of outputs or work products are we going to need to produce to help enhance that decision making process? So that was really a big top of mind for us as we entered into this. We knew we couldn't produce this giant technical document that was hard to digest and full of vernacular that maybe the technical folks might have understood, but maybe those who are making the business decisions wouldn't be able to take the time or have the time to dive into something that was deep and lengthy and very detailed. So we had to figure out how we were going to present the results to this as we move forward. And what we wanted to do was, we really didn't want to boil the ocean here and try to address everything. We really tried to pick a couple of key issues to start with and to bring the ROSI approach to the business in a way that, we weren't dealing with every single problem the organization had, or we weren't dealing with kind of things that people didn't know about. We had to try and find a couple of issues that were really important. And I think Guillermo alluded to the couple that we tackled. Number one was around resilience in the sugar supply chain, and number two was around the packaging aspects and that. So, but for today, we're going to talk about one of those two, and it's going to be the sugar supply chain and the associated results of our ROSI analysis and how that's influencing decisions now inside of Arca. David, anything to add?
Yes, so just reinforcing the idea, John, that the logic behind how we structured this was, how can we be more effective on deliver the message that we want? And that's why we focus on the decision making. If you think through the decision making process, you will identify that there is certain things, criteria or variables that decision makers need to see on this kind of projects. So we are trying to close the gap between elevating sustainability initiatives, in fact, trying to remove that distinction between sustainability and business initiatives by elevating the quality of the data, but transforming that into a business language, into financial terms, into things that are more easy to grasp to decision makers, or they understand better, or have been managing that for a long time. And at the same time, just moving or trying to move the people close to that process, to move the people to be more open and to accept certain variables that in some cases had not been presented in this way. So that's why we focus on the decision-making process, not on the project, but how we can present this to be integrated in the business dynamic, to be integrated into the budget conversations, into those kind of aspects that at the end are the ones that are driving the conversations internally. So, John?
Excellent. All right, so let's take a few moments and just talk about our approach. As we heard in the last session, water is a big issue, and it's a big issue not only because it's one of the main ingredients, if not the main ingredient, in the beverages that Arca produces, but it's also very important in the agri supply chain. And so sugarcane is obviously a big part of Coca-Cola that's bottled by Arca, and understanding the sugarcane supply is really important to the organization. And I think everybody's aware that, as things happen with the climate going forward, it really changes the water stress and water scarcity in different parts of the supply chain. And sugar is no different. And one of the things that we really thought about in terms of sugar was, okay, let's look at that supply into the future. Let's try to anticipate what's going to happen in terms of water stress in the growing regions of where the sugar is produced. And let's start to think about how resilient that supply chain is. And let's take the ROSI process and try to understand what the potential economic implications will be associated with the changes that are expected in climate and the associated water stress. So we started this process really by really trying to understand the problem. So we ended up really with sugar, but we really looked at all of the main top ingredients that goes into the products that Arca makes. And we really tried to understand what the water footprint it was of each of those commodities, and really where they were sourced around the world. And what we did was we then looked at top 5, 6 commodities, and we looked at what was going to change over the next decade or two, or what was forecast to change in association with water stress. And we talk mainly about climate change, but it's also about how well the water is managed in these basins. I think, some of these areas that we looked at, the water management of those resources is quite good. In other areas, it's sort of non-existent. So we had to take that into account as well. We also thought about, the volume of the material that we were sourcing, and the value that that commodity had in terms of being able to produce the products and the cost associated to Arca. So, while we ended up identifying sugar as the greatest concern, we did go through a list of all of their commodities to sort of get to that spot. The next thing that we did was really, really important, and again, you heard about this earlier, is we started with an integration into the business very early by looking for and getting on board experts in the procurement area, in the technical areas, in the commercial areas of the business, in the public affairs area of the business, in the risk management area. So one of the really I don't want to say hidden benefits, but one of the benefits of doing the ROSI process is that you engage the organization very broadly and you bring all the experts in. And you need to do this to gather all the information that is necessary to build an effective forecast and ROSI model to monetize this. So we needed to talk to the people in the sugar operations to understand how they actually irrigated. We needed to understand, what their understanding was of how the water resources are managed in that area. We have to talk with the procurement folks about what are the options of sourcing it from area A or area B, or how might you be able to change in the future if water stress increases. So we were engaging of all of those different parts of the organization, and we worked together to understand what water availability looked like in the future, what implications that would have on growth factors, as temperature changes, as water availability changes, as we have problems with new pests we didn't have before because of that. And we were able to build out these scenarios into the future so that we could understand what might happen to the quality of the ingredient that we have here, sugar, or what might happen with regard to the yield per acre or hectare of land that we were looking at. So that was a real important step, and it's an important step in all these ROSI projects. And then with that information in mind, we're able to kind of step back and say, okay, here's what it looks like now. Here's what we think it's going to look like in the future. If we just take a business as usual approach, what would that really mean? And try to understand all the costs or all the benefits of taking an action or not taking an action, and trying to find out what the most significant ones were. And that, in this case, was added production costs, added costs for having to switch supply in the future, how this would impact product sales and profits, and what other costs we had associated with this, regulatory, recapitalizing other parts of the supply chain that we would have to do to make sure we had enough enough inputs to make the product. And then with that said, what we had to do was take all that knowledge, take all that information we had, take all those models that we have, and really boil it all down to the point where those leaders that were involved in making choices about how these commodities are procured and the sorts of amounts and quantities of that particular thing we would need in the future, we needed to boil this down so that they had this insight and this information and could make informed decisions about what to do next. So that same group of experts, this cross-functional team that looked at and identified what we were going to face in the future if we didn't do anything, also had the opportunity to say, okay, well, now we understand this is a multi-million-dollar potential impact. With that said, we think we can do A, B, C, or D. And so they can bring also informed alternatives back to those leaders to make a decision on what you could potentially do about this. And then with that summarized in a digestible format, then it's much, I think then we've influenced the decision process such that it's much more informed about the sustainable aspects of whatever the topic might be, in this case, supply chain resilience. And leaders can now look not only at what they're purchasing from a commodity standpoint in terms of price and quality, but also now they understand the resilience of that supply going into the future and the sustainability of that supply going forward. So it's a little bit of a long explanation for a 4-step process, but I think it's important for everybody to understand that we're not just going in a room and sitting down and building some Excel spreadsheets. This is a whole engagement process that you have to enter into to, number one, do a good analysis of what the implications of action or inaction might be, and to bring the organization along as part of that process. David, what would you like to add to that?
So, as you imagine, we face different challenges. One of them was to try to be very quick and prioritize where to focus. So we leverage on satellite information to gather information that we didn't have at that moment. And we really fast, as John mentioned, we go through the main water intense crops, but at the end, really fast, we focus on the things that matter. So that's one thing that we face or try to address with the technology available. And the other thing, of course, we face a lot of skepticism at the beginning when we gathered all these functions, and for some of them was the first time hearing this kind of concepts, or they hear the concept but they don't relate to the concept very well. So things like climate change, we break down that concept into something that means or is clear to the specific function. So if we are in front of the procurement team, we're not talking about this is an effect of climate change. What we are saying is this is going to affect your price, your availability, or your productivity on a very specific area where you are sourcing. We are talking about what are the dependency that you have from certain crops. What is the number of reliable sources that you are having, the number of suppliers, and where are you exactly on that position? How could that affect your coverage, your hedge, your strategy on how you are buying stuff? So is moving from that some kind of this broader concept breakdown, and then having that conversation with them in terms that they can relate. And I think at the beginning was again kind of a resistance, but very quickly in the process, because of how this was designed, we jumped from asking questions like why we are trying to understand climate change to discussing what is the impact. So that just that jump between the conversation on concepts and then see the change and see how they are starting to engage and be more curious and ask different kind of questions was, I think, the main thing that we accomplished with this exercise, right? It's not only the documents or the calculations, but at the end is we need the people to start thinking in this way, because it's impossible to move at the scale that we need in an organization if we are not working with every single associate with this mindset. It's not about a department or a specific project, but it's a mindset that we need to embed and try to get all this expertise, all this knowledge that people already have on their own functions, but just with the lenses of sustainability. Thank you, Jan.
Exactly. And I think, that part is very important in how you change the mindsets of these people. And you've got to kind of keep that in mind throughout the whole process here. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll share with you these specific things so you can take a little bit closer look at it. But, one of the things we really had to do was kind of boil down this extensive analysis into something we call a decision support document, a 2-page document that really we think helps people get their head around these issues in terms of business implications. And you can see this one here has been genericized, but it's very close in terms of format and structure to what we used here. And again, it's a very simple couple of page format that really tries to, summarize, what is the economic impact here that we're talking about? Sure, we talk about better reputation, more resilient supply chain, license to operate, all of those sort of concepts, but translating this into real impacts that are time bound and are specific, I think is the kind of thing that we need to do to help influence decisions and get people to think about these business challenges in a more sustainable mindset, in a more resilient mindset. So that's what we set out to do in terms of this effort. And like I said, we summarize the economic impact. We put relevant context details here so people can get an appreciation and understand, maybe in less technical terms, more terms that kind of a broader audience can understand, why this is a challenge and what sort of things are going to have to be overcome by the business to successfully navigate the risks that are associated with this. How and when specific economic impacts will be realized. I mean, a lot of times you see people saying, "Oh, this is $100 million problem," or this or that, but rarely do you see, okay, well, I expect that this is going to occur here first within the next period of time, and here's the probabilities associated with that. So we try to be very clear about, how and when to expect these impacts. And it's also about, okay, well, if we don't do anything, this could possibly happen, but we're not without alternatives to address these issues. So with this sort of analysis, if in fact this problem were to occur, here's what's causing it, here's what we think needs to change, and here's the kind of things we could do to get started towards that change. So in a nice, concise package, we're able to summarize pages and pages of technical research so that decision makers can quickly and effectively make a decision that includes factors that hadn't been considered before. The other thing that comes with the package is the backup. As David mentioned, there's satellite work, there's all kinds of research, but probably most importantly is, well, how did you come up with these numbers? And one of the things we do with all of the ROSI efforts is we produce these models. And for any of you that are involved in trying to allocate resources, get capital, get financing, whatever you do, there's always a business case to be made, right? And this is no different. What is different about this is that, oftentimes people say, well, this sort of stuff is too soft. I can't get my arms around it. It's intangible. Well, I think what we found out is if you really, step back, you think about it, you look at the data you have available, whether that's data inside your organization or data, that peers and competitors might have, or, data that's in the academic literature, for the most part, there are factors out there and there are ways to build forecasts about, these sorts of issues and how they can influence the economic performance of a firm, or how investing in these things, might lower your risk or help you increase your revenue, et cetera. And for all the ROSI work that we do, we build these models. Now, these models have, all of the variables that, you would expect in terms of business growth and what's going to happen to the business, but they also add in, the issues that are associated with the environment or social issues that have implications on the business. The other things that are included here is that we don't just do this for a point in time. We do this like you would any sort of forecast. You model that out over a period of time, and we identify the cash flows in or out of the business that are associated with this. And by doing that, what we can do then is we can use the standard measures of investment quality that is applied to every other investment a business might make. So we can look at payback period, we can look at NPV, we can look at internal rates of return associated with this, and we can put sustainability investments in the same framework as all other business investments. And, like any other models, I think these visuals that come out of these things are very helpful, be they waterfall charts or bar charts or whatever. We saw some in Tansi's presentation earlier today, but understanding what the implications of action or inaction are and what the costs associated with this, I think are very important. And then last but not least, as with any forecast or any model, there's some adjustments you have to make, and you adjust it based on probability. You adjust it based on the confidence you have in your forecast, and you adjust it based on something we call attribution, which means, maybe this particular thing is causing it, or maybe there are other factors. And you have to take all these into account. And so with all of our models, what we do is we apply some level of conservatism in this and make these adjustments like you would with any other business forecast. So, not only do we have this simple boiled down version, all the backup research, we also have these models. And these models too can also be used not only to justify the investment, but to do a bunch of different what if analyses. Or if the information improves, you can come back in and adjust your model and look at the benefits that you might get over time. David, what else to add before I move to the last slide?
No, I think we can move, John, to the last slide, because I would love to have more time for the conversation. Yeah. And just this is kind of a summary of the concept that we already shared, right? This was more about changing mindset, strengthening the decision-making process, and that revealed that we need to develop people capabilities, right? We understand that once we start with this discussion, we identify that we need to strengthen some abilities, and even we identify that will have at some point a conversation on how we are organized, right? How our structure and our incentives are organized, and if that is allow us to collaborate by design. I think the only thing that I will add is this is an iterative process, right? This is an open conversation with the organization, and especially with the leaders and the two-pager that John showed. We're back and forward with them, right? Trying to understand if this is enough, if this is hitting the mark, if this is helping you to compare different decisions or take a decision. And we identified who should be involved before we start the project, who should be involved, who's going to take that decision. And then we make sure that the teams that work for these leaders were involved. We try to avoid to just be in an office, be on the spreadsheets, as John mentioned, and then come with kind of a project and present that. That is not going to work. It's just getting everyone together, the new perspectives, the different perspectives, and then go back and forward, just to refine the final way that the company is comfortable to use this kind of information. So, John, back to you if there's anything to add.
Yeah, nothing to add. We've got probably about 10 or 15 minutes left. I'm gonna, stop the sharing now and open it up for questions.